In June 2015, the Chinese stock market crashed, and the Shanghai index saw its worst single-day fall since 2008. This economic crash was a serious challenge to the party leadership because it came right after Xi Jinping had unveiled his Made in China 2025 plan. The plan was an industrial policy which aimed to make China a world leader in key industries like energy, AI and biotech. But for any of this to happen, the Chinese economy had to be brought under control. And so while all of this was unfolding, the Chinese government launched their largest ever civil society crackdown, which would see the arrests of hundreds of human rights lawyers, many of whom later reported torture and forced drug ingestion. And this became known as the 709 crackdown, and it affected hundreds of lawyers and more than 7,000 NGOs. The 709 crackdown was the start of Xi Jinping's attempt, after he'd secured his position within the party, to expand his purge to all of civil society. And so this was also the time when Xi Jinping's personality cult got into full gear, and so soon shops were selling his book, The Governance of China, and also selling plates, medallions and trinkets with his airbrushed face printed on them. And the next few years would see a conflict emerge between Xi and the remnants of the Shanghai clique led by former President Jiang Zemin, as well as other forces opposed to him in the media and the military. In the original anti-corruption campaign, Xi had enlisted the help of a senior party figure called Wang Qishan, who became prominent because he was the governor of China's construction bank, one of the biggest banks in the world. Wang and Xi both knew each other when they worked in labour camps during the Cultural Revolution. And Wang Qishan is one of the economic reformers of the 1990s. During the coronavirus outbreak, many people have become familiar with a Chinese outlet called Caixin, or Caixin. It's one of the few journals in China which is willing to publish stories directly critical of the CCP's policies. Foreign media has praised Caixin in the past for outstanding journalism, but in China, almost all outstanding journalists are in prison. The reason Caixin is able to get away with publishing these articles is because it's actually controlled by Wang Qishan, who protects the publication with his financial influence. As governor, Wang Qishan facilitated close ties with the SEC Media Group, which is the parent company of Caixin, and since then the magazine has mostly done his bidding. And so 2016 saw a battle between Xi Jinping and similar elements in the Chinese media. After the People's Daily said that all state media should be loyal to the party, an outspoken real estate tycoon called Ren Jiqiang criticised this line and said that people should be loyal to the nation, not the party, which caused a mass of very critical articles from Xinhua, the news agency. And Caixin stepped in to defend him. Shortly after this incident, sources posted an anonymous letter online calling on Xi Jinping to step down because of his incompetence, and told him to watch out for his own safety. The letter was allegedly posted by a hacker on a company called Watching, which is owned by the SEC Media Group. Initially, Xi Jinping actually stepped in to defend Ren, but after the publishing of the anonymous letter, it was clear that things had gone too far. Dozens of people were arrested in the response, and the editor of CCP's leading intellectual journal, Zhou Shi, hanged himself in the company building after it was clear that the party was coming for him next. The head of the SEC was forced to resign, Caixin was banned from publishing for 2 months, Tencent was completely banned from online news reporting, and this appeared to be the start of the conflict between Xi and Wang Qishan. Even if Wang had not published the letter, he'd seemingly created an environment where it could be created. So now that he'd secured the media, Xi Jinping turned his attention to the military and the law. Because unlike the first conspirators led by Bo Xilai, who directly wanted to take power from Xi, this second round appeared to be trying to limit his power rather than remove him. And so, Next came the removal of the alleged ringleader of this group, a man called Sun Jung-tsai, who was a relatively young official who'd risen through the ranks very quickly and become the mayor of Chongqing, the same position that Bo Xilai had held before he was purged in 2012. Xi Jinping visited Sun Jung-tsai in 2016 and praised his great achievements, although these achievements were clearly a bit too great for Xi, because just a year later, he and all of his officials were completely expelled from the party, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. In hindsight, this was obviously a way for Xi to remove potential successors before he totally took over the party in 2018 and removed term limits. He then installed his own former aide, a man called Chen Min-er, as mayor of Chongqing. And so the rumour is that Chen Min-er is actually being groomed to take over from Xi in 2022. The theory is that rather than stay in power forever, the term limit abolition is a way for Xi Jinping to guarantee his own successor, rather than let another faction choose one for him. And so the theory is that Chen Min-er will take over as president in 2022. But that clearly remains to be seen. And a few months after this, Xi Jinping purged the military again, imprisoning dozens of officials. One of the leading generals hanged himself before he could be investigated. And party officials came out and directly said that Sun Jung-tsai and these generals were trying to seize power from within the party. And so, with the removal of all of these potential challengers in 2017, the stage was finally set for Xi Jinping taking over the party in 2018. And he was able to basically fill a lot of departments with officials who'd worked under him in Zhejiang, which is why Xi Jinping's clique is often referred to as the new Zhejiang army. At this point, I have to give an update on everything that's happened since 2018. But I have to point out that a lot of the information we have after this is fairly speculative and based on unconfirmed sources. And so a lot of what we know is based on a guy called Guo Wengui, who's a billionaire who fled China in 2014, and he started his own whistleblower movement to try and expose and take down the CCP, in his own words.
Hate CCP. I want to take them down.
Understood.
I want to take this regime down.
You love the people, you love the culture,
I love the culture.
You do not like the government.
Yes, the government and the CCP, Communist Party.
He's the highest profile defector ever from the CCP, and a lot of what we know about this party conflict is because of him. So he's recently gone after a few key party members, specifically Wang Qishan. In 2018, the billionaire Guo Wengui said that Wang Qishan was actually the leader of a massive business group called HNI, which owns Hainan Airlines and other companies, and the group is actually a massive money laundering scheme to take Chinese money from officials and launder it and place it into Western banks. And he listed among his accomplices the Chinese actress Fan Bingbing, who apparently slept with Wang Qishan in exchange for dirt money. In the aftermath of these allegations, Fan Bingbing disappeared for several weeks and was then fined several billion yuan for talking about it online. Then what happened is that the former head of Interpol, who is Chinese and works for the CCP, was sent to France, where in the same month the alleged head of the HNI group mysteriously fell to his death in the Alps. And when Meng returned home, he was purged by the party and sentenced to life in prison. So what happened there? What Guo Wengui, the billionaire, says is that Interpol chief Meng Hongwei was actually sent to France to have the CEO killed, and he was also sent to the US to try and persuade Guo to return to China, and because he failed, Xi Jinping had him purged from the party. Many people dismiss Guo Wengui's claims as too extravagant or outrageous, but he's actually predicted many things that would happen that have come true. Another prediction that Guo made in 2018 was that several members within the party were actually part of a massive conspiratorial group called the South Put War Conspiracy. This group would meet on a Buddhist island off the coast of Zhejiang, where he said that several members would meet with former President Jiang Zemin and Wang Qishan and others, and they would meet to conspire to limit Xi Jinping's influence within the party using financial power and threats. and he specifically named two intermediaries of this group called Meng Jianzhu and Sun Lichun, and said that they were part of this conspiracy working against Xi. And so in early 2020, in March 2020, both Sun Lichun and Meng Jianzhu were purged from the party and placed under arrest, which implies that at least some of the billionaire Guo's claims are right, and that there actually may be a conspiracy working against Xi. A few months ago, there was allegedly a massive dispute between Xi and Wang Qishan because Caixin were publishing articles directly contradictory to the party. Apparently, in June this year, Xi Jinping actually had Wang Qishan placed under house arrest using a secret police, and he was forced to write a letter pledging his loyalty to Xi Jinping, just ahead of the Central Party meeting, and that Wang has been under surveillance ever since. We should take all of this with a grain of salt, but if this is true, it appears that Wang Qishan was actually working to conspire against Xi, and that he's been effectively purged and removed as a threat. The most interesting thing that's happened since then is that there's now a new rift that's opened up between Xi Jinping and his right-hand man, the Premier, Li Keqiang. Li Keqiang, as the Premier, is supposed to manage the economic side of the country, but for most of his premiership he's been almost invisible and done almost nothing. Just after the party meeting in June, however, Li Keqiang openly said that 0.6 billion Chinese people lived on less than $140 a month, which caused a massive public outcry. He then went on to say that Chinese health insurance is practically useless, that most investments in businesses in China would fail, and that closing China off to the rest of the world is a big mistake. So now we've got a rift between these two leaders where Xi Jinping is saying that everything in China is great and he's trying to push nationalist ventures, starting border conflicts with India, Taiwan, Japan, Indonesia, even Russia, whereas Li is saying that China is in a bad way and needs to address its problems. Just last week, Xi Jinping wrote the leading article in Qiushi, the leading intellectual magazine, outlining why core leadership is essential, and filling it with his own personal quotes. So what will happen next? I think we're seeing basically, because Li Keqiang was promoted during the peak of the coronavirus, the party has to an extent kind of rallied behind Li Keqiang, because his policies are basically much more practical and pragmatic compared to Xi's policies abroad, which is seen as wasteful. And so I think de facto you're seeing a kind of a rallying around Li Keqiang. Now, the question is, will Li Keqiang be able to sustain this? If you look at party history, in the late 1950s, Mao was sidelined by his second-in-command, Liu Shaoqi, and he responded to this by launching the Cultural Revolution and having Liu purged and killed. Xi Jinping can't really do something like that because the Cultural Revolution specifically is one of the things the party always sets itself against. Another parallel is Deng Xiaoping in the 90s, when he was challenged by Chen Yun, but Deng was able to outflank him using the Southern Tour and using a big media campaign and getting the support of the elders. Xi Jinping doesn't have the support or the political savvy to pull either of those things off. So there's another party elder meeting coming up in about a month's time, and then we'll see if there's any change towards this kind of policy, whether Xi Jinping will be able to regain control of the party, or whether we'll kind of see basically a shift towards Li Keqiang's leadership. But I'll predict that whatever happens, Xi Jinping will still try and stay on past 2022. Anyway, we'll have to see what happens. So, thank you for listening.